All right, so today we're diving deep into Seneca,
Yes, Seneca.
Volume 2 of the Tao of Seneca,
A collection of letters.
packed with Stoic wisdom.
Absolutely.
I have to admit, sometimes when I think about philosophy, I kind of get a little intimidated.
Yeah.
But reading Seneca, he's so witty and sharp,
Yeah.
and it's just amazing to me how relevant his advice
Oh,
is,
yeah.
even though he lived almost 2,000 years ago.
Timeless wisdom.
So you ready to get into this?
Let's do it.
Okay, awesome. So there's this one line that I read, I think it was in the first couple of pages, where Seneca compares learning to a bee gathering pollen.
That's such a great analogy. What I find so fascinating about that is it really emphasizes how it's not just about collecting information passively,
Right.
but it's about actively digesting these ideas,
Right.
transforming them into something useful.
Yeah. It's like, okay, we read a book, maybe we highlight some things, but do we actually do anything with that information?
Right.
Do we apply it? Do we make it something that's useful for our lives?
It's about making our own honey, so to speak.
I love that. It's about turning knowledge into action.
Exactly.
I like that a lot. Okay, so in this volume, Seneca really doesn't shy away from some of the heavier topics. He talks about dealing with hardship and suffering, how to find happiness, and even how to face death without fear.
All the big questions.
Right. Where should we even begin?
Well, let's start with virtue. That seems to be a central theme in Seneca's letters.
Yeah, let's do that. So he has this line, and it's so powerful I have to read it. All good men, insofar as they are good, are equal.
Mm.
What's he getting at there?
Well, I think that really gets to the heart of Stoic philosophy.
Okay.
The idea that we all have this inherent capacity for virtue. It doesn't matter our wealth, our status, our background. We all share this potential for goodness.
So he's saying true equality comes from within. It's about that inner goodness.
Exactly. And it's a challenge for all of us to rise above those external differences and connect on a deeper level.
That's such a great point. So it's not about the hand we're dealt, but how we play it. That leads perfectly into another one of Seneca's big ideas, enduring suffering. He actually says that hardship can be an opportunity to build virtue.
That's right. He even says, when one endures torture bravely, one is using all the virtues.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty intense. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, when things are easy, when life is good, it's easy to coast. But when we face challenges, that's when our true character is tested. Do we fold under pressure, or do we use those virtues to navigate the situation? Things like patience, courage, resilience.
It's almost like those difficult moments can reveal hidden strengths we didn't even know we had.
Absolutely. I mean, think about a time when you had to push through something really difficult. Didn't it make you stronger?
I can definitely think of some times where I look back and I'm like, how did I get through that? But I did, and I think I came out the other side a little bit better for it.
Right, and I think that's what Seneca is trying to get us to see, that hardship can refine us.
That's really powerful. Okay, so we've talked about virtue, we've talked about facing hardship. What about happiness?
Well, Seneca had a lot to say about happiness, and for him, it was all about finding inner peace.
That makes sense, but how do we actually do that? How do we cultivate that inner peace, especially in a world that can be so chaotic and stressful?
Well, I think one of the key things Seneca emphasizes is the power of the mind.
No.
He believed we have a choice in how we respond to our experiences.
So it's about recognizing that we have that power.
Exactly. And he was way ahead of his time in understanding this. There's this one line where he says, if pain can be conquered by a smile, will it not be conquered by reason?
Whoa, that's deep. It's like he's prefiguring modern psychology, right?
It really is. He's highlighting the power of our thoughts to shape our reality.
So it's not about denying pain or difficult emotions. It's about learning to manage them, to choose a more helpful response.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our thoughts have power, and we can use that power to our advantage.
That's amazing. Okay, this has been super insightful already, but I want to shift gears for a minute and talk about something else. Seneca was a big advocate for simple living. And this is kind of ironic because he lived in ancient Rome during a time of incredible wealth and extravagance.
Right. But that's what makes his perspective so interesting. He wasn't just preaching from some ivory tower. He was living in the midst of it all, and yet he still saw the value of simplicity.
So what's the takeaway here? Is he saying we should all go live in a cave and renounce all our possessions?
Not necessarily. It's more about recognizing that trap of materialism, that constant pursuit of more, more, more.
Right.
It's about asking ourselves those tough questions. How much do I really need? And how much of what I own is actually a burden?
That's such a good point. It's easy to get caught up in that cycle of wanting more, but when does it end? And at what cost?
Seneca was really challenging us to think about what truly matters.
So it's not about deprivation. It's about being intentional with what we bring into our lives, about focusing on those things that truly add value and letting go of the excess that just weighs us down.
Absolutely. And honestly, I think that message is even more relevant today, don't you think?
100%. We're bombarded with messages about what we should buy, what we should own, how we should look. It's easy to lose sight of what's truly important.
Seneca is like this voice of reason cutting through all the noise.
It's a reminder that true wealth lies in virtue and inner peace, not in the size of our bank account or the number of things we own.
Exactly.
And I think that's a great place to pause for now.
Welcome back. I'm so glad we're continuing this deep dive into Seneca's letters.
Me too. I'm really enjoying this. So last time we were talking about Seneca's view on simple living and how true wealth doesn't come from material possessions,
Yeah.
but from virtue and inner peace.
Yeah.
But he also doesn't shy away from going into some of the more like maybe shadowy parts of ourselves,
All right.
personality.
The not so pretty parts.
Yeah. And there's this one letter where he talks about what he calls diseases of the soul, which sounds kind of intense.
It does. It sounds a little dramatic.
Yeah, but it's actually really insightful.
It is.
So what is he talking about there? What are these diseases of the soul?
Well, I think what Seneca is highlighting here is the importance of aligning our actions with our words.
Okay.
He's essentially calling out hypocrisy
Well,
and advocating for authenticity,
Yeah.
being true to yourself, walking the walk, not just talking the talk.
Yeah.
And I think we've all encountered people who, maybe say one thing but do another. And it can be really kind of jarring.
Yeah, definitely. So how do these diseases of the soul fit into all of this?
Well, Seneca uses this metaphor of disease to describe those negative patterns of behavior and thought that can really hold us back from living a truly virtuous life.
Right.
Things like greed, envy, anger, even excessive pleasure seeking. He sees these as almost like chronic conditions that need to be addressed.
So it's about being self-aware, recognizing those negative patterns that we might have.
Precisely. And he doesn't just diagnose the problem,
Right.
he offers solutions. Seneca believed that through reason and through the practice of virtue, we can overcome these diseases and achieve a state of inner harmony.
I see. So he also talks about passions, which seem a little bit different from these diseases. How would you describe passions?
Well, I think of passions as those sudden, intense bursts of emotion
Okay.
that can sometimes hijack our reason. A flash of anger, a wave of fear, that overwhelming urge for instant gratification.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Right. And the key, Seneca argues, is to not let these passions control us. We need to cultivate the ability to manage them, to guide our actions, even when we're feeling those strong emotions.
Yeah, that sounds really difficult, though. How do we even begin to do that?
Seneca believed that through the consistent practice of Stoic principles, we could develop what he called equanimity,
Okay.
which is the state of mental calmness and stability, even in the face of challenges.
So it's not about suppressing our emotions entirely. It's more about finding that balance
Right.
between emotion and reason.
Exactly. It's about responding thoughtfully rather than reacting impulsively.
That reminds me of something you were talking about earlier,
Okay.
about how it's never too late to start working on ourselves.
That's right. He specifically addresses this to those who feel like maybe they're too set in their ways to change.
Right.
He says, "Why do you wait? Wisdom comes haphazard to no man." He's encouraging us to be proactive
I love that.
in our pursuit of wisdom.
Yeah, it's like, don't wait for things to happen to you. Go after what you want
Exactly.
and take control of your life. So I think it's important to note here that Seneca wasn't just a philosopher, like sitting in an ivory tower, thinking about all this stuff.
Right.
He was also a statesman, a playwright, and he lived through some really turbulent times in Roman history.
Absolutely. And I think those real-world experiences really informed his philosophy.
Yeah, totally. Like, for instance, there's this letter where he talks about the burning of Lyons, which was this major city in Roman Gaul.
A devastating event, like a modern-day catastrophe.
I can't even imagine. How did Seneca respond to something like that?
Well, I think he used it as an opportunity to remind people of the fragility of life
Okay.
and the importance of being prepared for the unexpected. He writes about how everything is temporary, how in the midst of things which have been destined to die, we live.
It's like that saying, don't take anything for granted.
Exactly. And he encourages us to appreciate what we have, to focus on the present moment,
Yeah.
to recognize that material possessions are ultimately fleeting.
But I feel like he doesn't just leave us with a sense of despair, right?
No, not at all. He also emphasizes the importance of choosing our response to misfortune.
Okay.
He acknowledges that suffering is a part of life, it's inevitable.
Yeah.
But we have the power to decide how we react to it. He urges us to cultivate resilience, to find that strength within ourselves.
So it's about that inner fortitude, that stoic resilience.
Exactly. And I think that's incredibly empowering.
Yeah, totally. Even in the midst of really difficult circumstances, we still have a choice.
Right.
We can choose to react with fear and despair, or we can choose to face those challenges with courage and reason.
And that's where true freedom lies.
It reminds me of another key theme in Seneca's writing,
Oh, yeah.
his focus on practical application. Like he's always asking us, how can we use this knowledge to actually improve our lives?
Absolutely. He's not interested in abstract theories
Right.
or just intellectual exercises. He wants us to take his ideas, put them into practice.
Use them as tools.
Exactly. Tools for living a better life, a more fulfilling life.
He's like the original self-help guru,
That's a great way to put it.
except his advice is backed by centuries of philosophical wisdom.
Right.
So there's this one letter where Seneca explores the complexities of relationships, and specifically this idea of benefits received,
Kind of interesting.
and how those benefits, sometimes they can become kind of like burdens.
Right, right. He even asks whether he who has helped us has squared the account and has freed us from our debt if he has done us harm later.
So it's like, just because someone did you a favor in the past,
Yeah.
that doesn't give them a free pass to mistreat you now.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that every interaction is a new opportunity
Okay.
to choose how we respond,
Yeah.
how we treat others,
Yeah.
how we allow ourselves to be treated.
That's so true. It's easy to get caught up in that sense of obligation,
Right.
feeling like we owe someone something. But Seneca is reminding us that we always have that power to choose how we engage in our relationships.
And he also cautions against giving with the expectation of getting something in return.
Okay.
He writes about how it can be detrimental to give too much to someone.
Right.
Because it can create a sense of entitlement
Oh, yeah.
or even dependency.
So there's a balance there.
There is.
It's about giving freely, without strings attached.
Exactly. It should come from a place of genuine care,
Right.
not a desire for reciprocation.
I see. So it's about being mindful of our motivations.
Precisely. Approaching our relationships with clarity, with intention, creating healthy dynamics based on mutual respect.
I love that. His wisdom on relationships is just as relevant today as it was back then.
Absolutely. Timeless wisdom.
And another big theme that runs through Seneca's letters is this idea of our fear of death.
Yeah.
Now, it might seem kind of morbid to talk about, but Seneca approaches it in a very, straightforward way.
Right.
And even sometimes with a little bit of humor.
Yeah.
So he really challenges us to examine our preconceived notions about death
Right.
and to approach it with reason rather than fear.
He even argues that we should despise death less because we believe too many stories about it.
So he's suggesting that a lot of our fear comes from the stories we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
The myths, the cultural baggage we carry around death.
Exactly.
And he wants us to strip all of that away
Right.
and see death for what it is, a natural part of life.
It's inevitable,
Yeah.
the end to our earthly journey.
I see. So it's not about denying death
No,
or pretending it doesn't exist.
not at all.
It's about confronting it with courage.
Precisely. And with dignity. He reminds us that it's not about how long we live, but how we live.
Right.
If we live a life of virtue, a life filled with purpose and integrity, then our life is complete, no matter when it ends.
That is such a profound shift in perspective. It's like by acknowledging the inevitability of death,
Yeah,
we can actually free ourselves to live more fully in the present.
exactly. That's exactly what Seneca wants us to do. He wants us to live with intention, to savor every moment, and to make the most of the time we have.
And he didn't shy away from talking about some really controversial topics like suicide.
Yeah, that's right. This was something that was being debated among philosophers at the time. And Seneca, being Seneca, tackled it head on. He believed that in certain circumstances, choosing to end one's own life could be a rational act.
Right. And obviously that's a very sensitive topic.
Very much.
And it's important to approach it with a lot of nuance and understanding.
Absolutely.
But I think it's fascinating that Seneca was willing to engage with these really difficult questions and challenge conventional thinking.
Right. It really shows his commitment to intellectual honesty,
Yeah.
his willingness to grapple with those tough realities of life.
So as we're delving into these letters, I'm constantly struck by how Seneca is able to connect philosophy with everyday life.
Yeah, me too. He moves so effortlessly from discussing these big concepts like death and virtue to offering very practical advice on things like how to read,
Right.
how to learn, how to make the most of our time.
And in one letter, he brings back that analogy of the bee gathering pollen,
Oh, yeah.
this time applying it to the act of learning and gathering knowledge.
Right. He's encouraging us to be curious, to explore different perspectives, to draw knowledge from a variety of sources.
Yeah.
But he cautions us against passive consumption.
Right.
He wants us to actively process that information to make it our own.
It's about moving beyond just absorbing facts and actually applying them, creating something new.
Exactly. It's about what he calls practical wisdom.
Okay.
The ability to use knowledge effectively, to make sound judgments,
Right.
to live virtuously.
He also warns against getting lost in the details,
Mm-hmm.
becoming so obsessed with accumulating knowledge that we miss the bigger picture.
Right. He calls this a sort of intemperance. It's like those
Right.
people who are like walking encyclopedias,
Right.
but they can't seem to apply any of that knowledge to their own lives. They're all theory and no
True.
action.
And Seneca is the opposite of that.
Right.
He's all about balance
Mhm.
and action,
Yeah.
about bridging the gap between knowledge and actually living it out.
Yep.
And as we're concluding this part of our deep dive, I'm really struck by the breadth and depth of Seneca's insights.
Yeah. It's remarkable.
I mean, we've covered so much ground,
Yeah.
from facing hardship and finding inner peace, to confronting our fears, embracing our interconnectedness, and yet I feel like we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to discover in these letters.
So we've talked about virtue and facing hardship and even simple living and confronting death. But you know what else Seneca was a big fan of?
What's that?
Humor. He loved a good laugh.
Yeah, it's true. His letters aren't all, doom and gloom.
Right.
There's actually a lot of wit and humor sprinkled throughout.
It makes him feel so relatable.
Right.
Like here's this guy, he's this brilliant philosopher, he's dealing with all these big questions, but he's also able to laugh at himself and find the humor in life.
Yeah, he doesn't take himself too seriously.
Exactly. So speaking of learning, there's this one letter where Seneca talks about the importance of liberal studies, but with a bit of a different take on it than we might expect.
Yeah, I think having come from that classical Roman education system, he definitely saw value in subjects like literature, history, and philosophy. But he also had very strong opinions on how they should be taught.
Okay, so what was his view?
Well, for Seneca, education wasn't just about accumulating knowledge.
Right.
It was about cultivating virtue,
Okay.
becoming a better person, and ultimately learning how to live a good life.
He actually says that the only true liberal study is the study of wisdom.
Exactly. I mean, he literally says, but there is only one really liberal study, that which gives a man his liberty. It is the study of wisdom, and that is lofty, brave, and great-souled. All other studies are puny and puerile.
Wow, he does not hold back.
Nope.
So he's basically saying it's not enough to just be book smart. We also need to develop our character, our moral compass, and actually use that knowledge to guide our actions in the real world.
Yeah, he's challenging us to really think about the purpose of education, to make sure it's not just about, getting a degree or impressing people, but about becoming the best versions of ourselves.
It's making me rethink my own approach to learning.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not enough to just read a book or listen to a podcast. I need to be asking myself, how can I actually use this knowledge to grow, to contribute, to make a positive impact?
Right, and I think that's the key takeaway from Seneca here. He's urging us to move beyond passive learning, to really embrace a more active and engaged approach.
Be more intentional with our learning.
Exactly.
He even compares excessive learning to a form of intemperance,
Yeah.
which is fascinating. It's like he's warning us against becoming those know-it-alls who are all theory and no action.
Right, it's about finding that balance.
Yeah, and Seneca was definitely all about balance and action.
Absolutely. He wanted us to be doers, not just thinkers.
I love that.
Yeah.
And it reminds me of another theme that we see throughout his letters, this idea of interconnectedness.
Oh, yeah.
He saw humanity as part of this larger web of relationships, and he believed that we have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of that web.
He recognized that our actions have ripple effects, They impact not only ourselves, but also those around us. He writes, "But our philosopher considers nothing more truly his own than that which he shares in partnership with all mankind."
It's a reminder that true ownership comes from sharing, from contributing to the common good, and recognizing that our well-being is interconnected with the well-being of others.
It's a really powerful perspective, and I think it's especially relevant today.
Yeah, especially as we're facing all these global challenges that require collective action and a sense of shared responsibility.
Right.
And it's important to note that Seneca wasn't just a philosopher who wrote about these ideas.
Right.
He actually lived them out in his own life.
Yeah, he served as a senator, he was an advisor to emperors. He really tried to navigate the complexities of Roman politics while still staying true to those Stoic principles.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Tao of Seneca, Volume 2, I'm just really struck by the timelessness of his wisdom.
Me too. It's remarkable how relevant his writing still is.
And I think that speaks to his deep understanding of the human condition.
Hmm.
Those universal experiences that we all share, the joys and sorrows, the triumphs and the setbacks, the search for meaning and purpose.
Yeah. And what's so great is that his teachings are accessible to everyone.
Right.
You don't need a philosophy degree to understand and appreciate his wisdom.
It's so clear and direct and often humorous, which makes it so engaging.
I think that's part of his enduring legacy. He really wanted to make a difference in people's lives.
So on that note, I want to leave our listeners with this question.
Mm.
What is one insight from Seneca that resonated most deeply with you? What is one piece of wisdom that you can take away from this deep dive and apply to your own life?
Maybe take some time to journal about that, to really let Seneca's words sink in.
Yeah, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep seeking that wisdom that lies within each of us.